Jamie, it is so good to finally catch up with you. I've had a run of my OG podcast guest on. Because back when you and I first met a couple years back, we were just kind of audio. We didn't have to worry about how pretty we looked.
Yeah, I've had to up my image a little bit.
There's no hope for me, but the world has gone video. So, hey, we just kind of ride with the trends. And this is really why I wanted you down, because when I think across my collection of past podcast guests, you kind of fill a niche, within what I call the commercialization. And for those people who are your small businesses that they love food. And I tell you, entrepreneurs are just always drawn to food. I don't know what it is, but entrepreneurs, they just always head to food. They want to start a business. They want to do something within food, whether it's a packaged good or a beverage, whatever it is. Well, as we're going to get into, when you try to commercialize what you're doing in your kitchen or what kind of a small operation and try to scale it, you run into multiple problems and challenges. And it's been years since we've talked, so I thought this would be a great time. There's been so many advances in the world. Let's just kind of see, has it gotten any easier for people to commercialize? How you doing, Jamie?
I'm doing good, doing good. Appreciate you having me on. Yeah, I think, in the world of commercialization, a lot of people have turned to AI and they've gotten some really good answers and some really lousy answers. So I think a lot of people have been, both over and underwhelmed with AI's capacity, depending on basically how much time and effort you put into training your AI. AI is definitely making an impact here on the front lines day to day. It's still not a panacea for somebody who knows what they're talking about and has been working for decades in the subject matter area. So
Yeah, and we're going to get into that because
yeah.
I've been doing different segments from different industries, how they're using AI, how it's improving or really not really infiltrating the industry. So I'm glad to hear that it is kind of making its way into food, but I'm kind of curious, and we will get into that. But before we did, I wanted you to educate people. I want to just kind of back up for a minute, put your consulting hat on, because you do a lot of that with all the multiple brands you work with at Catapult and also some of the other businesses that you're involved in. What is it that just makes commercialization of a product or a food just so difficult?
Sure, absolutely. So, commercialization it's first a term that summarizes a whole bunch of different activities. It's everything from developing the product using scalable ingredients that can be shipped over state lines, meaning they're FSMA compliant with the FDA. It means scaling onto equipment that allows you to run fast enough that you get those economies of scale, that you can actually charge more money for the product than what it costs you to make it. There's different sourcing issues around packaging as well. But really, it comes down to a lot of things around compliance. But then you actually have to take all of that product from a supply chain perspective and actually deliver it into the hands of consumers at a point at which they want to buy it and consume it. And you have to get them to do that over and over again, meaning it has to actually taste good and feel good in how they eat it. All of that has to come together and have that be profitable in order for something to be truly commercialized. That's a lot of different skill sets and hats you have to wear.
Yeah, it's so much more than just having a great product and people tell you, "Oh, this is great, you should sell it." And they just really just do not know what they're getting into. But that's why people come to you. That's why they come to Catapult to figure out, okay, this is my current operation, and now I need to learn to scale it all the way into distribution and getting it into the hands of consumers. When it comes to CPG or beverage, which would you say is more challenging? Not from a market's perspective, because beverage is incredibly competitive. We know that, but from a purely commercialization, not from a marketing standpoint, which offers a slightly easier path? Would you say CPG or beverage?
I mean, I think that beverage is going to be easier in that the liquids that you're dealing with 90% of the time are going to have the consistency and viscosity of water, which means that it's going to be the same equipment over and over again, same philosophy of how you fill and how you deliver the product in a way that's going to be preserved and stored to the point of consumer consumption. When you are dealing with everything from baked cookies to tortillas to plant-based meats to dairy yogurts and things like that, all of those things have different unique characteristics about them that make them challenging from a food science perspective to be able to deliver on what needs to be done. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, your individual food lane may have some advantages, but at in the grand scheme of things, I mean, I think beverage is going to come across as easier to scale simply because you have more options on where you can go to scale it.
With your background as a food scientist, when people come to you within your platform in which you help them commercialize, do you ever lend your personal expertise in as a food scientist, or are you more just helping them with equipment and kind of showing them the metrics that they need to be kind of shooting for?
Well, I have this philosophy about people that they don't fit neatly into a box. So I have done all sorts of weird stuff in my career, from
Such
literally
as
becoming a solar panel expert. I have a patent in how to peel tomatoes using infrared light. I have stood.
what?
Yeah, absolutely. You can use infrared light to peel a tomato. It melts the subdermal layer, and then you can just basically peel it off with your fingers. Super easy. Comes right off, and the rest of the tomato is untouched because infrared light only penetrates about a couple of not even a full millimeter deep. So yeah. Anyway, so yeah. I mean,
Sorry.
I've
How,
got yeah, yeah. No, I've got all kinds of weird stuff I've done. And my master's is actually in a baking lab. So I worked with breads and doughs in order to stabilize the gluten matrix, in order to hold the bubbles in it, so that when it puffs up, it generates a different consumer experience depending on how much it puffs up, whether it's a hard bite or a soft bite or all sorts of things. And I took that information and used that in scaling up milk bones, as in like the 90-year-old company that has been running milk bones up in
yeah.
Buffalo, New York for that long. So like
Oh,
just
congratulations. That's a very well-known brand.
yeah,
Little
yeah.
a little name drop there. Way to go, Jamie.
Well, I mean, it was all part of the Del Monte Holdings when I was there, so absolutely, I can name drop that one. I mean, I've worked with about 400 brands the last 20 years and commercialized thousands of products at this point. So yeah, I'm always happy to kind of, you know, strut my stuff a little bit, as it were.
You know what I'm always curious about, because years and years ago, I used to recruit CPAs. I was in the financial sector, and I was always curious. Do CPAs who spend their entire life, their day jobs, with finances, when they come home, do they want their spouse to do the checkbook? And I'm kind of curious. For someone like you, with this deep background in food, and you
Hmm.
spend all day with food, do you want to cook when you get home?
Oh, I love cooking. I'm told that I shouldn't cook because I'm a little more experimental in my cooking, which means that occasionally experiments fail. So um,
Jamie, we just want to sit down and have spaghetti meatballs, okay? You
you
don't,
know,
you create some fantastical, we missed a little bit. Everyone's hungry.
yeah, yeah. Have you ever considered a balsamic foam over the top of it? No, just no. Jamie, move on.
That, I don't know though. Balsamic though, maybe balsamic foam for the bread. That could be like a little topper. I could see that as the appetizer, but maybe not over the lettuce. That could be a little off-putting.
I will say that my concepts are interesting. My execution is not always great. I am not a culinologist by any stretch of the imagination.
So it's just you've kind of got me thinking about something. One of my favorite shows, I haven't watched it in a minute, but I get on these binges where I can't stop watching Chopped.
Yep.
And one of my, I guess the phrase is, you have this toxic trait that you think you can do something when you watch someone do it.
Hmm.
because they make it look so easy.
Mhm.
And there's something about all of us, home cooks. I call myself more of a cook than a chef. And you watch that and you think, man, could I do that? Could I take those five or four, three ingredients and create something? When you see a show like that with your background, as a food scientist, do you feel like you have a shot at that?
I can always come up with an idea that should work in theory. My execution of it is
The
not always the
execution.
greatest.
Yeah.
Now, if you wanted to then take my execution and scale it to about 100,000 units, that I can do in my sleep. So,
So if there was 100,000 judges and, you're the guy who can put whatever weird combinations together and get it out at scale.
absolutely. Just
All
don't know
right.
that
So
anybody would want to eat it.
that's, he scaled it, but it's all going in the trash. So you talked at the top a little bit about, AI or automation that's
Mhm.
somehow making its way into food. Ha- has it gotten easier with AI and automation, or is it just kind of noise and clutter? Are people just kind of tinkering with it because everyone is, or should it just be, let's just stick with the old tried and true? We don't need AI for this.
I honestly, everybody's toying with AI these
They
days, and
are.
if you're not, you're out of touch. In fact, you can commonly find some shortcuts just by leveraging AI in your day to day. So even just email management or relationship management and things like that, absolutely. But honestly, with when it comes to the food science part of things, there's not a whole lot of great AI agents out there trained on scientific data enough that it's able to fully support the needs of the brands that are out there. So instead, I would say that the AI agents out there are good for testing theories. You can test theories very quickly, but again, it comes down to
Such
the
as, I mean,
execution.
just give me an
Yeah,
example because I think
sure.
everyone should know by now what an agent is. Agents are different from, your Chat GPT, your Claude, your Grok. We're talking about a specialized data set that's an expert, if you will.
Right. I mean, there are a few platforms out there that are trying to train on the correct data and things like that. I'll name drop IFT's entry into this space called Co-Developer. I haven't had a chance to play with it myself, but I do know that they are out there and running off of basically the last 100 years worth of food science data. That said, a lot of that data is not always sensory in nature. So what it means is that you can get a formulation if you just put in, I want a formulation for a chocolate chip cookie. It'll go out and scrub and bring back a formulation for a chocolate chip cookie, and you'll say, okay, next I want a price for those cookies in a 16-ounce container, and so on and so forth. You can get all of that, but the data is not always great. What I would recommend if you're going to use AI, tell it then, after you've had it generate those prices and things like that, show me the equation and build me an Excel file to do that so that now I can go and validate that input information in real life, meaning calling flour suppliers and chocolate chip suppliers, and plug that information in, knowing that the formulas are relatively accurate to be able to then tell you what your real price is based in reality rather than in hallucination.
Okay, that's actually a pretty good idea because you're telling it, give me the prompt essentially, and then I'll go and get real time input information.
Hmm.
And then as you mentioned the sensory, I think that's the key, right? Because you've got something again, in my opinion, if you're just using an agent to give you a product that you think is in demand, to me, that's really almost disingenuous. It's like you're trying to game the market a little bit. That's just my opinion. That sounds like a big commercial operation that's trying to, hey, this is trending. Let's get in that rather than, we have a product that we know people love. Let's scale that. To me, very different.
Well, and I think it's always good to overlay, especially if you're at a larger organization, overlay your brand values in the type of results that it returns. If you are at Kraft and making macaroni and cheese, you don't want it to return to you that the next greatest thing that's in demand is a plant based meat based on mushrooms, right? It doesn't align with your brand. So instead, make sure that you're feeding as much information about your own personal situation into the AI as you're working, rather than just saying, what's the next greatest thing? Because the next greatest thing could be scraped from data if it's not, you know, processed correctly, could be from 30 years ago. So,
True.
it's one thing to keep in mind, like, it is scrubbing everything, not just the things that we hope it's scrubbing. So always kind of gut check. And also remember, if you're able to put it in there very quickly with a very short prompt, so can anyone else. And
Yeah.
humans are very intelligent. They're going to copy each other. It's really about distilling that down to the essence of what makes you, you, or your business, or your brand, that makes it a unique offering to the marketplace that will allow you to stand out amongst your competitors because everyone else is running the same AI basic searches that you are.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think you could use that information in your test kitchen. Get in
Absolutely.
there and start experimenting. And I think the reason that really, I think, to me, where I see this as being very helpful would be you're having supply chain disruptions,
Hmm.
and you've got to do some substitution, right? You've
Hmm.
got your brand promise. This is what we want to deliver. This is what we're known for. But man, we're really having a problem 6, 12 months out. We really need to start thinking about, can we find a suitable replacement? And I think that, to me, that's where I would see the support in the formulation, the quickly getting some different formulations, getting it into the kitchen. Okay, texturally, sensory, is it similar? To me,
Hmm.
that's how I would see it. Now, within Catapult and the other businesses that you're now involved in,
Hmm.
do you think robotics or any kind of industrialization is going to be benefiting those small to mid-size food manufacturers, or is that something that's still pretty far out, that's they're not going to have to really worry about, putting that in their workflow?
Yeah, there's been more entrance into the space that would make a significant impact here, specifically those that will rent a robot by the hour. So while they'll go out and install it and get it anchored up and things like that, and get it trained, they will charge you by the operational hour. That could have an impact, but the infrastructure cost, the actual cost of the robotics themselves to the company that's doing this lease agreement, has a certain ROI that they have to generate for the duration of that robot, and making sure that they get that will allow them to remain in business while also allowing this small to medium sized business, this food company, to remain operational as well. So there's some interesting calculus that says that there's like this sweet spot in the middle on how many hours are run in a year. And if you operate outside of that, then one side or the other loses.
Yeah, to me, I think it's still a little too far out. Most of the food companies I've talked to, it doesn't seem to be playing, a role in their overall process as it stands. Now, I'm curious, we touched on this earlier, but I was thinking about all the different categories that are available to someone, particularly entrepreneurs. And you've seen, again, as you said, you've worked with 400 plus brands, or maybe more than that. You said 400, right? Or
I
something.
did, yeah.
Um, if you had to start a business in food or beverage, are there some categories that you would be gravitating toward, and why? Not necessarily because of your own maybe knowledge of it, but from a business and a commercialization, from a point in which the market would be ready for this type of food. It's
Mhm.
profitable, it's sustainable. Which categories within food or beverage would you be looking at if you had to start a business, and why?
Well, given the current state of our society and where we're at and where we're headed, I would be walking up and down the aisles, at my major retailers, and looking at where there are not whole food style, meaning whole ingredient style products out on the shelf in a particular category. That is the trigger that is going to likely light up in the next probably 2 or 3 years. Looking on the back and saying, okay, can we remove the calcium phosphate so that it doesn't appear on the label and still have the product perform? Are consumers willing to follow me if I build a brand central to not having calcium phosphate? Now, personally, I have nothing against calcium phosphate still, but it would be that's where I would find those white spaces that would allow my brand to grow fast enough and piggyback on existing velocities on shelf that would ensure that I would have enough positive cash flow in the short term as well as the long term. Then it just becomes a matter of staging those in. So if I'm going to name a category, um, maybe not. But if I'm going to name what are the key attributes that will make something stand out on shelf and differentiate in the current environment and in the next probably 24 months, it would be those sorts of things.
So in the past, I had heard that there was a trend toward premiumization, and I don't know where that trend is. You could see where there's some categories that just the product has just been the same forever. I heard one, for example, like marshmallows, for example. They've just been the same. Personally have not seen any premium marshmallows, but to your point about whole food, I think that is speaking probably more to people than premiumization because the statistics are out. People are they just seem to be gaining too much weight, too much artificial, layered into their food. I think that'd be the way to go.
I think it certainly pulls on the active trends at the moment for sure. I think that your point about premiumization is inherent to the nature of launching a new product. By definition, you have to go premium at the launch of your product unless you have massive economies of scale that allow you to compete on price. And nearly no small or medium sized brand can do that. They can't compete on price. They have to go for a more premium offering because they just physically don't have the economies of scale that allow them to do that. It's
That's a
a
great point. I hadn't even thought about that, but you're right. You don't have the scale. You're going to be making smaller batches. So for it to make sense, it's going to be a higher price point,
bingo.
and therefore you can't offer a, you know, second tier or a similar type of product because you're just going to get crushed on
There,
on unit price.
there
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah, there was a movement to try to undercut that around the upcycled movement, around basically
Yes.
taking cheaper input costs. I won't say that that fizzled. It still exists. It's still valuable to many consumers, but it is very difficult from a supply chain to execute.
Yeah, that's interesting because I have had a few companies on that was their angle, and when you look at just the amount of let's just look at vegetables for example, because this is where you really see a lot of it is that most of your I don't know the statistics, but from what I remember was that
Hmm.
the grocery store grade is so much higher than just the normal food that comes out of the ground. Like, I have a garden in the back. And when I
Hmm.
look at the food that I produce out of my garden, I mean, some of the things they're misshapen and they don't look as normal, but they're perfectly fine. And you would use them in your own, salad or, tomato sauce, whatever. But that doesn't play in the grocery store. So you have a 50, 60%, 40%, something that just is they wanted to turn into this, upcycled. Isn't that what you're saying?
Yeah, what they're really doing is skimming off the B grade product. So the B grade product will often go to purees and things like that, where
Yes.
the appearance doesn't matter. Those purees and whatnot, they need to have that. They need to have that B grade product go into it because otherwise they're going to be too expensive. So it's really trying to take a percentage of those sort outs and move them up to a higher cost offering to consumers for the purpose of trying to get more money into the hands of the farmers that grew them. If you grew something that's misshapen, you're going to receive less money for it. But unless you can get it to be upcycled, and then you might, instead of receiving, let's say, 60 cents on the dollar of what your good product is going to go for, you might receive 80 cents. That's an awesome way to do things. And if the consumer's happy and feel like they're doing something that benefits the world, absolutely. But that product was never really going to waste. It was never going to rot.
I
So,
see.
yeah,
It's
the
just yeah,
product.
it's just going into, as you say, somewhere downstream
Mhm.
where it's being, transformed into something like a sauce or a puree. And it makes perfect sense because if you're only using 40% of your output,
Mhm.
your output costs have to go up. And listen, the inputs are getting more and more expensive, so it makes perfect sense. Yeah, but I haven't really seen that movement take off. So that's an interesting one that you touch on. So the whole ingredient is one area that you're kind of interested in as kind of a general category. But then you're kind of, unfortunately, when you go premium, then you're kind of forced to go into the premium outlets. And again, how do you get in? Because that's there again. That's the challenge. I mean,
Sure.
your Krogers and your Publixes, they're just though you're not going to compete to get on those shelves. I don't think.
Well, and competition, there is a way to do that. And in fact, if you look at the Krogers and the Publixes out there, they don't sell just the cheapest product out there. They have very finely tuned their shelf offerings to allow for consumers that they know already shop there today to offer them a variety of different options and allow them to trade up if they have the disposable income to do so, but not every consumer does. And so they will actually intentionally place certain amounts of product on shelf in certain stores and not put it on shelf in other stores, simply because they want to make sure that the consumers have what they want on the shelf. And so there's a whole lot of calculus that goes into that. There are, you know,
Yeah,
50, 50.
demographic data, right? Your zip code. I mean, they
Mhm.
understand what average household incomes are, and they know where they can add a few more premiums on the top shelf.
Exactly. Where that makes sense. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's great. So you looks sounds like you've branched out a little bit beyond Catapult. What so as we start kind of wrapping up, I'm curious. So where else are you now sharing these these inventions and patents and ideas and commercialization skills?
Oh, absolutely. So I am happy to say that I was able to, through the course of the last several years, train my team to run the day-to-day operations at Catapult. So I serve as a effectively part-time CEO, while I have decided to go and work with even younger teams that are out there, those that can't necessarily afford consultants, and work with the University of Wisconsin in the Food Finance Institute in a grant funded position to do education not only around commercialization, but actually around how to build a financially viable and sustainable business, even all the way back from farmers market, allowing them to then put those financials together, find those funds from a grant, equity, or um, debt perspective, and take their products to market and get them in the hands of consumers and grow and scale in the way in which we know that they can.
And I love the sound of that because when you go to school, you really need to come out with value add. You have to understand, how to make money as quickly as you can. You just can't sit around with, a degree that you can't, put to good use right away. And that's something very specific.
Yep,
Um,
and turns out we never have a problem filling all our seats. So we'd always love to have people come check us out. We've got programming not just for entrepreneurs, but for those in the space that might be experienced in certain areas but not in others. We're always happy to supplement folks that way.
do you want to
But
mention what it is? And I can get it in the show notes here, or maybe you give it to me afterwards.
Sure, sure. So, very quickly, foodfinanceinstitute.org is where we're located. We have a variety of different programs on our platform. Most notably is our fellows program. Is the grant funded free accelerator. Is 4 months. Well, it's 12 months long, but it's 4 months of classroom time virtually. And then we actually have with that year long support for with one-on-one trainers, experts in the field, all free, covered by the grant for the purposes of helping people grow and scale. That's the reason why we exist. I finally found a way to do the things that I enjoy and love. And by generating new jobs and economic growth, that means that I'm economically developing the state, even though not all of our participants are in Wisconsin, probably about half at most. Uh,
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so we've actually worked it out with them so that we can work with groups all over the country. We do, I think, require residency in the 50 states due to the
Yeah, so
grant.
U.S. based businesses or people.
Yep.
That's fantastic. I mean, yeah, because that was one of the things that it kind of struck me the first time we met. That in some ways you were kind of location inhibited. The way I kind of viewed it, with the kind of work you're doing, you need to be near that entrepreneur because as you kind of walk through that process, it's very technical, and many of them just really need help with even running the machinery, to understand how to get that product to be just right. And so that's not really a remote type of situation. So it's great that you've been able to, in some ways, kind of upscale or upskill yourself
That's the
to
idea.
help more. Yeah, you did it. You did it to yourself. How about that?
Hey, those
You
who know,
commercialized yourself.
now there's a point to end on.
That's perfect. And we saved the best for last. Well, Jamie, it's great catching up with you again. And I'm really glad to hear that you've got your staff trained and they can kind of keep cranking and supporting those local businesses. And now you can kind of take it to, a national level now with the University of Wisconsin in this grant program. I'll put the links down in the show notes as well. I'll put a link to our first episode, which will be an audio only. You'll have that there as well. And you're going to find links to Jamie on his LinkedIn profile and the different companies, where he's at. So you'll be able to connect with him and find him and reach out if you want to get started. So yeah, Jamie, great to see you again, my friend.
Absolutely. Thanks so much. And I'll keep adding things to my utility belt to help people out.
Keep going, keep commercializing.
Never
All right,
stop.
buddy. We'll see you next time.
Take care.